But I want to bring in Mike Florio, kind enough to join us from Canton, Ohio. As we got the Pro Football Hall of Fame. You know, Mike, I was thinking about a year ago at this time, John Gruden and the Raiders. You had Urban Meyer, back to coaching. You got Trevor Lawrence. Both coaches are gone, and here we are at the Hall of Fame. How would you, if I would have told you a year ago, hey, which coach won't be with their team this year out of those two, you would have said who?
Oh, it would have been Meyer, because John Gruden was going to be the coach of the Raiders for as long as he wanted to. Mark Davis was never going to fire John Gruden. He had 3 straight years of no playoff appearances, and he was under no scrutiny whatsoever. They were buddies. It wasn't going to happen. It took this other outside issue to force Mark Davis's hand. And frankly, I think one of the reasons why the Gruden emails got leaked was because if they hadn't been leaked, Davis quite possibly would have found a way to say, hey, he wasn't working for us at the time. It's irrelevant to us. He's going to continue to be a member of our organization. So it would have been Meyer, because we've seen other college coaches flame out. None quite so dramatically and entertainingly as Urban Meyer.
Yeah, you start to look at this, and then, Trevor, I think, gets a hall pass. Because when you're 22 and you're the grown-up in the room, we're asking an awful lot of him. They brought in players this year. Are you surprised that the over-under is 8.5 wins for the Raiders? What am I missing?
Well, they're in the AFC West, so they've got 2 games against the Chiefs, 2 games against the Chargers, 2 games against the Broncos, and you've got kind of a weird spot for this team. They made it to the playoffs last year. They worked their way through that dysfunction. They almost beat the Bengals in the wild card round. There was that screwy call on the touchdown pass to T. Higgins, and then the Raiders were driving late, and they were better than anyone thought last year. But now you have a regime change. How often do you see a playoff team have a full regime change, new GM, new head coach, new defensive scheme, new faces, and a very competitive division in a very competitive conference? And I think it is going to be. They could be a better team than last year and go 8-9. So it really doesn't surprise me.
All right, you're in Canton, and so you're in the shadow of Cleveland with the Cleveland Browns. What is the feeling? Do you get a sense of what Browns fans think will happen with Deshaun Watson?
Well, it's been a roller coaster this week for Browns fans, because they went from feeling relief on Monday when the decision from Judge Sue L. Robinson was that Watson should be suspended 6 games to now this sense of foreboding that because the NFL has exercised its right to appeal the decision to the NFL itself, and the NFL still clearly wants to impose a significant punishment on Deshaun Watson, and the game is rigged. I mean, the union agreed to it. This is the bottom line. It doesn't matter who makes the first decision. What matters is who makes the second decision. And Judge Robinson gave the NFL everything it needs from a factual standpoint. Her most important aspect of her decision were her factual findings, because those are binding on appeal. And she found that he did it. She found that he violated the personal conduct policy in 3 different ways. She called it nonviolent sexual assault for victims that had their evidence presented in this process. And now the commissioner can do whatever he wants, or the designee can do whatever he or she wants. And remember this too, Dan, because it really didn't jump off the page. The judge basically found that Deshaun Watson lied. And that is not going to go over well with 345 Park Avenue when you are in a setting like this and you're not telling the truth. This is your chance to come clean and get a lesser punishment. If you don't come clean, the punishment is not going to be reduced.
I think you said that you think the NFL is going to drop the hammer. And this is
I think they are.
Before,
I think he's going to be I think it's going to be full year.
Okay. Now, if you're, let's say, and you're a lawyer, if you're with Deshaun Watson, what do you do now, today, that maybe can help circumvent or mitigate a year-long suspension?
Well, I mean, today, short term, what I would try to do is convince the commissioner to exercise his ability to designate someone else and hope that that someone else can be prevailed upon. Because if it's ultimately the commissioner handling the appeal, why would it be less than a year? If the employees who ultimately report to the commissioner have been consistently asking for 1 year, I assume they got their directive somehow, some way from the top of the organization. So if the guy sitting at the top of the organization who has previously said, yeah, go try to get a year, yeah, ask for a year, if he's the one making the decision, it's more likely to be a year. So I would try to craft a letter or do something to try to shame him into handing it to someone else who may be slightly less biased, not as close to the action, maybe somebody who hasn't been involved in making decisions about the league's approach to this. That's all you can do for now. Otherwise, it's sit back and wait.
All right, football-wise, the Cleveland Browns, will they be content with Jacoby Brissett as opposed to maybe trying to go out and bring in Jimmy Garoppolo if Deshaun's down for a year?
Well, that's a great point, Dan, because earlier this week, the head coach, Kevin Stefanski, was asked about whether or not they have multiple plans based upon what the ultimate decision is. And he said they do. And I thought all along, okay, Brissett makes sense if it's 6 games. If it's full season, that changes your analysis. And I think they are sort of in the we'll cross that bridge when we come to it mode. But if they do find themselves in a spot where Watson is out for the year and there's nothing they can do about it, how do you not consider what would be a win-win? Garoppolo gets a year to come in and play. He can reestablish his career and then go off somewhere else as a free agent next year when Watson comes back. The only hitch is this. They got a 5th-round pick for Baker Mayfield that can become a 4th-round pick, and they're paying $10.5 million of his salary when they unloaded him to the Panthers. I don't think they want to get hijacked by the 49ers. And the best timeline for the Browns would be they don't find out that Watson's out for the year until after the 49ers cut Jimmy Garoppolo. But I don't think the plane's going to land that way. I think the Browns are going to know if they lose him for the full year, while the 49ers still have Garoppolo under contract unless they trade him to somebody else, and then that ends the whole question.
Give the audience an idea of how long this appeal is going to take. That when would a ruling happen with the commissioner?
Tomorrow is the deadline for the union to submit its paperwork in response to what was submitted yesterday by the league. There's no hearing on appeal. There's no new evidence. The evidence is already done, and it's favorable to the NFL. The CBA and the personal conduct policy require an expedited process, but it doesn't say 3 days, 5 days, whatever, just expedited, like hurry it up. And it makes sense because people need to make plans. The Browns need to make a plan. People need to know what's going on. And there's still that possibility, Dan, of the NFLPA doing what it did for Tom Brady, doing what it did for Ezekiel Elliott, going to court to fight this, and along the way trying to get a temporary injunction aimed at allowing Deshaun Watson to play while this all works out. But if that happens, because a big misconception about this, he won't play week 1 because his 6-game suspension isn't being challenged. Unless the NFLPA decides to challenge that, and they've already said they won't, this is about week 7, not about week 1.
No, that's a great point. Mike Florio, Pro Football Talk Live co-host, and his book Playmakers, How the NFL Really Works and Doesn't, available online wherever books are sold, a best-selling book. Help me understand what happened with the Dolphins and Stephen Ross and why Tom Brady and his agent weren't punished at all with the tampering.
Well, typically when it comes to tampering, it's only the teams that are potentially in trouble if they are speaking to people when they shouldn't. There's never been punishment for those who are tampered with. Players, it would have to be part of the NFLPA bargaining process, and it's never been a crime under the league's rules to be the one who's tampered with. So even though Brady, for 4 straight calendar years, was tampered with by the Dolphins, and Dan, listen, the Buccaneers tampered with him in 2020. Other teams tampered with him. And I mean, everybody was tampering. The Patriots didn't care. They didn't want to have an ugly divorce with Tom Brady. They knew he was leaving. Okay. They weren't going to be sticklers for the rules there. But it was so blatant. It was so bad. The NFL had to do something. You throw Peyton on top of it. Sean Payton, the former coach of the Saints, talking to him before he even resigned as coach of the Saints. So they had to do something. And my theory on that too, Dan, they wanted to get Stephen Ross for tanking, but they knew they couldn't because that opens other cans of worms they don't want to get into. So they got him for something. And the tampering was so blatant, they couldn't look away, and they punished him. And even when you look at what they did, the punishment really wasn't that bad when you consider how severe the tampering was and how long it lasted.
This is like Al Capone and income tax evasion. I mean, that's really when I read this and the commissioner's tone with the Dolphins, they were tanking. It's semantics and how, and I agree with you. Gosh, if I open up that can and we now have people doubting the integrity of the game and the bottom line of winning games and gambling, I can't allow that to happen. It's almost like, let me shift this over here to tampering. And we're not going to, I'm going to be railing on this. Meanwhile, over here, this is about tanking. This is purposely trying to lose games to better your draft selection. Plain and simple.
He said it. They found that on numerous occasions, the owner of the team said that he believed it was better to improve draft standing in 2020 than to win games in 2019. And the only thing that saved him is Brian Flores said, I'm not going to do that. He made his belief clear. That's why he fell out of favor with Stephen Ross, because he refused to go along. Dan, one of the benefits of being a multi-billionaire is you never have to order a code red. All you have to say is, gee, I'd really like to have a calzone for lunch, and you're going to have a calzone for lunch. You don't have to tell anybody to go get it. It's going to show up. That's one of the benefits of being that rich. So he did everything that he could do to get the people who worked for him to do what he wanted. He wanted Joe Burrow. He wanted Joe Burrow badly. Mm. And the people who worked for him, specifically Brian Flores, didn't go along with it. And what a shock. He ends up firing Brian Flores.
Good stuff, Mike. Thanks for joining us. Have fun there in Canton.
Thanks, Dan.
That's Mike Florio, Pro Football Talk Live, the show that precedes ours on Peacock.